Hey there folks, the #1 Backxwash fan from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Backxwash record, Only Dust Remains. Zambia-born, Canada-based rapper, noise experimentalist Backxwash is one of the most talented and unique musical exports coming out of Canada right now. I mean, besides practically carrying the Canadian underground rap scene on her back at this point, especially at a point in the country's history with the genre where their biggest mainstream representation is a waning pop rapper that just got annihilated in the biggest beef since Tupac versus Biggie, her discography also features some of the most sonically boundary-pushing and emotionally apocalyptic sounds and lyrics that any rapper, period, have delivered throughout this entire decade so far. And now, after deservedly winning the 2020 Polaris Music Prize for her highly acclaimed and deservedly praised record that was kind of a breakthrough for her, God Has Nothing to Do With This, Leave Him Out of It, it has only been an uphill trajectory for Backxwash, as the couple of follow-ups that we've gotten since then have been just as great and at times even better. And now here we are coming off of 2022's absolutely brutal, both musically and lyrically, record, His Happiness Shall Come First Even Though We Are Suffering. Only Dust Remains is a singular release in the context of Backxwash's discography and her general larger body of work, because while the title of the greatest achievement in her overall discography is certainly up for debate when you consider how consistent she has been since practically day one, it really does feel like this is almost inarguably her most sensitive, emotionally vulnerable, and generally speaking, heartfelt record to date, which is saying a lot considering raw, unfiltered emotion has always been a primary quality of her sound. To talk about more literal things before getting into the more thematic aspects of this record, which I will in a moment, I do want to talk about the more literal things that I really do enjoy about Backxwash's latest record. For example, Only Dust Remains has what I would consider to be some of the best production work that we've ever seen from her in her larger body of work so far. I mean, don't get me wrong, Backxwash has always had nothing short of amazing technical abilities as a producer of her own music, but this record really does feel unique and like something entirely different from a production standpoint compared to anything that she's put out in the past. Things are kind of taken in a new direction here, and almost entirely away from the industrialized horrorcore sounds of some of her most acclaimed records from the past few years. And in that sense, this record almost feels like a bit of a turn away from the traditional sound that one might generally expect from Backxwash, which is something that I absolutely love to hear, as her latest effort offers up a bit more of a spacious and atmospheric experience. Not to say that her previous records weren't well produced. Again, she's always been an amazing producer, but this record does feel like a step in a different sonic direction for her and for the general sonic aesthetics of the Backxwash name that people will associate with her when her name is brought up in conversation, and that's a really nice thing to see. Tracks like Ninth Heaven and Stairway to Heaven, lots of mentions of heaven on this record, have some very lush moments that I don't think have ever truly been seen in the same way before in Backxwash's discography, with those lush moments feeling very pretty, very serene at times, despite a lot of the darker subject matter that's being brought to the table here from a lyrical perspective, and I feel like that's never really been a quality of Backxwash's music that's been fully explored to this extent before, which is really nice to see. And the record closing out with the gospel-adjacent choir and the singing and the clapping and everything, it just feels like a really pleasant, harmonious almost way to end out the record, and really nails in the idea that this is a different creative direction for Backxwash without really ever losing the things that made her great in the first place. That finale in particular really does stick the landing and gives a striking moment in time to kind of close out the record and close it out nicely. And, you know, the woman herself is just as great as ever as well, with her putting forth some absolutely amazing work here, as Only Dust Remains sees a lot of the aggressive tones that made up her past works feeling a lot more grounded here. I mean, don't get me wrong, she still feels as immediate as ever as a rapper and a songwriter, but at the same time, it almost feels like this is her peeling away some of the layers of artistry, and I mean that in a good way, because while Backxwash has never been a character or persona by any means, this album really does feel like her kind of removing some of those typical artistic facades that pretty much every artist kind of puts up, either intentionally or unintentionally, through their art, kind kind of creating different ways that the listener understands or views them in one way or another, the way that the audience perceives the artist. It's something that every artist does, kind of creating this specific way that they are viewed by fine-tuning their art to be made in a certain way or to be viewed in a certain way. And Backxwash, like really every other artist, certainly has done that in the past. But here on this record, it really does feel like maybe the most unfiltered that we've ever seen her before, from a vocal standpoint, from a lyrical standpoint, really from every standpoint. And I'm not saying that necessarily makes this better or weaker than any other Backxwash record. Personally, I would actually say it almost leans a bit towards the former for me, but as a whole, it does mean that this record is completely unique from anything else that she's released in the past, ultimately allowing this record to feel like something wholly unique and, in many regards, kind of unexpected from her. Now, from a thematic standpoint, this record does run pretty deep, to the point that I don't think I could effectively convey all of the roller coaster of emotions that is presented in this record in a short, condensed video review, and as a whole, I really do recommend sitting and letting this album wash over you from a lyrical perspective if you are interested in it. But to do my best to convey how I feel about this record, in my eyes, Only Dust Remains is a record that really hones in on the idea of survival. And now, it may not really kind of come across that way at first, and I can completely understand why someone wouldn't initially view it that way. I mean, I didn't even view it that way initially. I mean, much of Backxwash's songwriting here is focusing on ideas like wanting to give up, and feeling fear, and feeling rejected on a social and political level, and feeling like you have absolutely no direction to go in for safety or for comfort or for any sort of protection. And it isn't hard to understand why. I mean, neither Backxwash nor myself would be the first person to acknowledge that the world is seemingly becoming a darker place every day. A rise in fascism, a rise in political unrest, seemingly no hope for minority groups living in countries with hateful, bigoted individuals that gain more and more power and traction every single day. It's a somewhat hopeless world out there. Not to necessarily say that one is to be hopeless, but to say that it definitely is understandable how someone could end up feeling that way when they take a step back to really embrace everything. And that's the thing. Countless people feel hopeless, and in a sense, that is what Only Dust Remains is about. But this is not an album in any way that encourages to continue just diving into that hopelessness and letting go, letting yourself fall to pieces within that. I would say rather, this is an album that takes note of the bitter reality of the world today and embraces it with deeply frustrated but nonetheless open arms, and she encourages the listener to stand firmly on their ground and to not let that hopelessness destroy them in any way. And the sad reality is that hopelessness is ultimately what destroys many things. Individual people through means of self-destruction, societies through means of political destruction, so on and so forth. Hopelessness is something that can ultimately be the final killer for virtually every single human being on this planet. And an album like this that not only accepts that that is a real emotion that people feel and are heavily feeling right now, but also somewhat subtly encourages the listener to keep existing in that sense, it ends up being a powerful statement, and one that I end up connecting with a lot on a deeply emotional level, making this, in my eyes, maybe the single most relatable record that Backxwash has ever put out, an album that is deeply personalized in her own unique experience unquestionably, with nothing here that's really meant to pander towards any specific audience or anything of that sort, but at the same time, an album that a lot of people can understand and relate to, myself included. I mean, in a time where it feels like a lot of people's rights of just existing and being alive are being stripped away, that democracy as a concept is falling apart at the seams in countries that were meant to, at one point or another, supposedly be the beacons of that very concept, the people in power being individuals who have nothing but despise for those that they do not characterize or categorize as quote-unquote normal. It feels like Only Dust Remains is a reminder that through worldly destruction and self-destruction alike, we continue to live on. And I think that at the end of the day, that's probably one of, if not the most powerful message that I've personally derived from any record so far this year. Not saying that that was the intent, Not saying that that wasn't the intent, but what I personally take away from this record is exactly that. And for me, it results in this record feeling like a deeply powerful and emotionally striking experience that not only strikes a chord with me, but also strikes a chord with me more so than anything else Backxwash has put out to date, at least in my eyes. And that's saying a lot, because from day one, like I said before, she's been consistent. She's been putting out music that's produced wonderfully, written painfully beautifully at times, but here on this record, it just feels like a unique and personal experience through and through, and honestly, I don't think that there's any other album that will come out this year that's exactly like this. I do think that as time goes on, more and more people will be covering the state of the world at large. I mean, it's no secret that popular music has arguably gotten to a point where it's continuing to ignore a lot of these ideas of political unrest, social unrest, and the oppression of minority groups, while a lot of alternative and underground music has only increased in overt political thematics. So I do think that a lot of people will cover the same topics throughout this year and the next several years, I'm sure. But at the same time, I think that it takes a very singular artist to execute a vision like this that is every bit as much hers as it is universal in terms of an experience to relate to. It's singular, it's something that only she could make, and it's one of my favorite albums of the year so far, easily. And look, I'll be totally straight up. Only Dust Remains, it may not be every pre-existing Backxwash fan's cup of tea, per se. I mean, if you came to her music for the walls of noise that occasionally popped up, the intense listening experience that's just as fueled by industrial and horrorcore influences as they are bitingly introspective and almost depressive at times lyricism, you may not have fully come to the right place with this record, and you may be expecting something a little bit different than what Backxwash is offering her audience here, but this is genuinely a listening experience unlike anything else that Backxwash has produced in the past. I mean, it is still her at her best vocally and lyrically, no question, but Only Dust Remains provides a different tone compared to her previous works. Rather than being a mind-melting hellscape beyond comprehension, this is a record that takes suffering and looks it directly in the eyes, swallows all of the pain and regret, and wakes back up the next day ready for whatever comes ahead, not really knowing what to expect. And, you know, maybe that's just as hard to comprehend in some ways, and it results in a damn powerful listening experience. I'm going to give this record 4.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this album review. Thank you for watching The Infinite Jukebox, and I'll see you in the next one.